The Unseen Room. The Parker family, Mark, Julia, and their two children, Sam and Lily, moved into the old Thompson house just before Halloween. It was an elegant Victorian home on the edge of town, priced far lower than its size and grandeur would suggest. Julia had hesitated when she saw it listed, but Mark convinced her it was the deal of a lifetime. From the moment they set foot inside, strange things began happening. Lily, the youngest at 6 years old, immediately pointed to an empty corner of the foyer and whispered, "There's a man standing there." Julia laughed it off as a child's imagination, but a shiver ran down her spine. Days passed, and the family adjusted to their new home, at least on the surface. At night, though, the house seemed to come alive. Doors creaked open by themselves. Cold drafts swept through rooms that had no windows. The sound of soft whispers drifted through the halls, though no one could ever make out the words. One night, while the kids were asleep, Mark and Julia sat in the living room, sipping tea. Mark was reading an old book he found in the house's library, and Julia was knitting quietly. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room grew impossibly cold. Julia looked at Mark, who had gone pale. His eyes were locked on a page in the book. "Julia," he whispered, "you need to see this." She leaned over and read the passage he pointed to. "They say the Thompsons vanish without a trace, but their spirits linger, watching over their house. And there's one room that no living person should enter, the one that does not exist." Julia laughed nervously. "What does that even mean?" Mark shook his head, but before he could answer, Sam appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, there's something wrong with my room." They rushed upstairs to find Sam's bedroom freezing cold, despite the heating being on. The windows were shut, but the temperature felt like winter. Lily, now awake, stood at the door to her own room, staring intently at the wall. "There," she said, pointing. "The man is here again. He says we shouldn't be here." Mark and Julia exchanged worried glances. Julia bent down to Lily's level. "Sweetheart, what do you mean?" "What man?" Lily's voice was soft but certain. "He lives in the room that's hiding. He says it's his house." Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. The room that doesn't exist, he thought, determined to put an end to the nonsense. He went to the library and grabbed a flashlight. "There are no hidden rooms," he muttered, more to convince himself than anyone else. "Let's check." They explored every inch of the house, but found nothing unusual until they reached the end of the upstairs hallway. As they stood there, staring at the solid wall, Mark felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up.
"I swear this wall is wrong," he said. Just then, a soft creak echoed through the hallway. Julia gasped. A seam appeared in the wallpaper, right in the middle of the wall, slowly widening into a doorframe. The temperature dropped again, and from the darkened room beyond, they heard footsteps. Mark, flashlight in hand, took a deep breath and stepped forward. He swung the light into the room, but all it revealed was dust and cobwebs. It was empty. But then, from behind them, Lily whispered, "He's standing right there." Julia screamed, pulling the children back as Mark stumbled out of the room, slamming the door shut behind him. As soon as he did, the seam in the wall vanished, and the hallway returned to normal. For days, they lived in fear. The house became more hostile. Lights would turn off by themselves. Cold spots would appear even in the warmest rooms. And Lily kept speaking to the unseen man. Finally, on Halloween night, Julia had enough. "We're leaving," she declared. But when they tried to leave, the front door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. It was as if the house had sealed them in. Desperate, Mark decided to confront the spirit. Grabbing a candle, he stood before the now vanished door and spoke out loud. "This is your house. We understand, but we don't want any trouble. We'll leave. Just let us go." There was silence for a long moment. Then, a voice, deep, cold, and distant, whispered, "You must find the room." Mark turned pale. "What room?" Suddenly, the house began to tremble, and the walls creaked. The door to the hidden room slowly reappeared. Julia grabbed the children, and Mark, terrified but determined, stepped forward and opened it again. Inside was something they hadn't seen before, a single portrait of the Thompson family, standing before the house, with cold, lifeless eyes. Beneath it, in an old, dusty chair, sat the figure of a man, still as a statue, his eyes hollow and his face gaunt. Mark's voice trembled. "What do you want?" The figure slowly raised its head. "Leave," it whispered, "and never come back." The door slammed shut behind them, and when they opened it again, the room was gone. The next morning, the Parkers packed up and left without a word. The haunted house forever left behind. But as they drove away, Lily turned to the window and whispered, "He's still watching."